sell to this tiny, narrow, but very wealthy people. Sell it to this elite. And how did this move? Whatever. Mentioned this before when we talked about Federalist paper when I assigned that. But don't forget, this is propaganda. The Federalist Papers were not exactly what Madison, Hamilton, or Jay thought. It was, how do we sell it to these people who are terrified of revolution and giving up their wealth? And they saw what happened with Shays' Rebellion, and they did not want it to spread. And so Federalist number 10, as you read, Madison laid out this republic of the elite. It would not be a democracy. No factions. Because the biggest party would be based on wealth. So it said it would just be us elite, together, all like-minded, the best people, the most responsible, the better sorts, the most patriotic, not swayed by emotions, not swayed by greed. Of course, he's exactly playing to their greed. Not a democracy. So he laid it out with this idea that the best will come together and always come up with better decisions, implying that the elite will agree on everything, which of course they will not. Hamilton and Madison wrote this in a number of the Federalist Papers, how the elite will come together and all agree, and they'll never disagree on the big issue, on the minor one, sure, but the big one. And that would last about 2 years. Madison and Hamilton became bitter opponents and rivals. In fact, Hamilton thought Madison was lying and hypocritical. Madison thought Hamilton wanted to be a king. Almost immediately they fell apart. But this was purely to sell the document. And it worked. The vote was close, but it worked. But what about Virginia? Virginia, the two sticking issues were the Bill of Rights and the how vague it was over control of the militia. How vague that was. And Madison promised Jefferson, I'll write the Bill of Rights. He promised George Mason and Patrick Henry, who Patrick Henry continued to oppose, but I'll deal with the militia issue, even though Madison didn't want to. And to show you how important these two states were, Virginia and New York, this is a very famous cartoon image. I showed you this once before. And they had the 9 that the Constitution said they needed. But that was irrelevant unless they had Virginia and New York. It worked. Virginia did vote for it. New York voted for it. And it was, I didn't type this down, but it was ratified. And the vote was pretty close. Okay, Massachusetts was close, but New York 89 to 79 in their state senate. Virginia 57 to 47. It was pretty close. And so once they got New York right here, ratified. North Carolina and Rhode Island didn't ratify until after the fact. They were told this was the government. Rhode Island just basically didn't want to, but they were stuck. And that became the Constitution. And I put this map up, it has the different counties. And gray opposed to the Constitution, dark for it, and then mixed. And the reason why I put this up there is to show that it was a lot of people here opposed, a lot of people here opposed. It was not sectional North versus South, which people just assume because of the issue of slavery is coming up. The Constitution is ratified, and they immediately had an election for president. The state assemblies picked electors, and boom, had an election for president. And that election would lead to what we call the Federalist era, 1789 to 1801. The Electoral College unanimously, twice, elected George Washington in the Senate. Who was his vice president? John Adams. Now, the way the Constitution read is that John Adams, or whoever got second most votes, would be vice president. First president, second vice president. That turned out to be, well, nearly destroyed the country. We'll get to that. Who's this? Jefferson? Yeah, that's Madison. That's Adams. Who? Yeah, that's Hamilton. There they are. Those are some of the founding fathers we have to mention. All of them are going to have a very important member of the first government: President, Vice President, Treasury, State Department, and Speaker of the House. Couldn't get the Senate. So Madison immediately set about writing the Bill of Rights. So I write down, Madison wrote the Bill of Rights. He wrote 12 amendments, 10 would be ratified. And this little cartoonish version is from some old textbooks, worksheets. And it's kind of hard to read it, but it has kind of the quick, cut and dry, very misleading versions of First Amendment, freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. Like, for example, fourth, it just says arrests and searches. I like the third, quartering of soldiers, implying you have to have soldiers quartered in your house. But this is from the 1971 textbook, Young Citizens. But let's get to the 10 that were ratified. And don't forget what I told you. 10 were ratified in 1791. One additional one would be ratified 200 years later. And that's the last amendment to be ratified to the Constitution. It's virtually impossible to ratify the Constitution.
When were they originally ratified?
1791. So I'm going to talk about a few of these. And the reason I'm going to talk about them is to show they're not cut and dry. They're not that clear. Let's look at the one everybody in the United States talks about. They'll say my First Amendment rights. Free speech, or that one, speech, press, religion, assembly. Celebrating the First Amendment, that silly cartoon there. Let's look at it. Go ahead and read it. Okay, I better add something. It says, Congress shall make no law. And then it goes to each separate one. Respecting the establishment of religion or the exercise thereof. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. You get how it does that then? So it always kind of bounces back and forth. So go ahead and read it. Let's go ahead and read it. Let's go ahead and read it. There we go. Look it is. Do you have freedom of speech? Does that say you have freedom of speech? Does it say anywhere you have freedom of speech? Do you have freedom of religion? Does it say you have freedom of religion?
The law says no.
Exactly. It doesn't say anywhere you have freedom of speech. It just says they cannot pass a law saying you can't talk. It doesn't say anywhere you have freedom of religion or the establishment of state religion. But it says they can't ban just a particular religion. But of course, what's religion? What's speech? It doesn't say you can assemble anytime you want. In fact, you might see the big word on that. Peaceably? I wonder what the definition of that's going to be. But for example, if you assemble on any day other than Halloween in New York City with a mask on, that's illegal. Because that's, to their point of view, not peaceable. Peaceable. And petition government for redress of grievances? Sure, you can petition government. Do they have to read it? So, Congress can make no law abridging the freedom of speech. You don't have free speech. You can't just say anything you want. Congress just can't tell you as an individual you can't talk. You can't walk into a crowded theater and yell, fire! Because you think it'd be fun to watch them panic. You can't do that. Which makes sense, but that means you do not have freedom of speech. And so who decides what speech is then? Congress. And who enforces the laws that Congress writes? The executive, so they can interpret it. Do you see the loopholes there? Do you see the gray area? What is religion? Yeah, they can't ban a religion, but they can define what a religion is. So you can have I go to the church of stealing money from freshmen. That's my church. And well, yeah, right? And you can't infringe on my right to freedom of religion when I go and roll freshmen and take their money. I know. Can't have that. Or there could be other ones that are obviously going to be much more severe. Like, for example, churches allow for polygamy. They say, no, that cannot be. And so, there's gray areas. You do not have blanket freedom of speech. So you hear people say all the time, that's my First Amendment right. Really? And does it say anything about, for example, do you have freedom of speech when you go to work? When you get a job, can you say whatever you want while you're at work?
So long as the customers don't hear.
Huh?
So long as the customer's manager don't hear me.
Customer's manager?
Customers and managers.
Oh, manager, meaning you don't, right? Because you have to obviously censor what you say. So you do not have freedom of speech, or you can be fired. If you go on some public forum that's owned by a corporation, can they ban what you say? Of course they can. It doesn't say anything about what's one. What are all the kids on today? The TikTok, or the Google, or the YouTube,
The YouTube.
or what's the one?
Twitter,
The Instagram. They can ban anything you say. Those are private companies. You can't say anything you want. They can ban you. And by the way, that also means they can, and they do record everything you say and sell it to somebody to sell you stuff or to spy on you. Every single thing you say. Why? Because it's a private corporation. So, you do not have blanket freedom of speech. I'm not saying we don't have incredible freedom to talk here, to speak. But clearly, you do not have freedom of speech. And I wonder if this is going to be banned eventually. Within a decade, criticism of the government is going to be banned.
Libel.
Huh?
Libel.
Not live, that's called sedition. But we'll get to the word, I know all these words. All right, let's look at another one. Madison did not want to give up federal government control of the militia. So he wrote this amendment. Everyone look at this amendment. So First Amendment is speech related. Okay, we got that, but you got to know there's gray areas. So if I'm going to ask you about the Bill of Rights, you can do that. So everyone got down the First Amendment? You got that down? Second Amendment. What's it say? What's he talking about? By the way, how would you ever start anything with a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state? He starts out with a statement and then goes back and kind of says a rule. It's really weirdly written. Why would he do that? What does it say? Well, I'll tell you what some of the words are. Does anybody know what regulated meant when he wrote it down in 1790? Yeah, trained and controlled. A trained and controlled. So it can't just be a bunch of yahoos running around with weapons. It's got to be trained and controlled. That's what it says, regulated. What's a state? It could be a country, or it could be an individual state. Madison left it in air on purpose. Next, what's an arm? I knew some, yeah, everybody, arm. What's an arm? Some weapons are, some weapons aren't. Some are, some aren't. What's an arm? Okay, I'll give you a little hint. A hunting rifle is an arm. I'm sorry, a hunting rifle is not an arm. A hunting rifle is not an arm. A cannon's an arm. A bayonet's an arm. Yeah, Thomas. Huh? Can be used for what? Yeah, military weapons. Weapons that are for the military are arms. But weapons for personal use are not arms. Military weapons are arms. So, a cannon, a bayonet. The smoothbore muskets that the British and the militia used, those can't be used for anything but war. They're too inaccurate. But the rifle that was coming out just at this time, called the Kentucky long rifle, very accurate for the time, but worthless for war, because it took about 2 minutes to load. It's not a military bomb. So today, a thermonuclear bomb is an arm. A guided missile destroyer is an arm. But a hunting rifle It's not an army. So who are the people?
So, wait a second. People are allowed to have candidates.
Who are people?
Citizens. Those who can vote.
Who are people? Who are people? We are the people. We the people. Not individual. We the people. So the people can have a well-trained militia that's going to be well-armed. Does that make sense?
So we can collectively have candidates.
Yes, in the militia. But not a regulated militia. It has to be regulated, not a bunch of yahoos with weapons. Because he says regulated, that means trained. And that's the way the Supreme Court would rule in about 100 cases. Over and over again, everybody knew that it was all about a militia. Everybody knew it was all about militia. Most of my life, yeah, of course government could ban individual weapons. Of course. Wasn't even considered. Not even considered. And I should add, of course states could do it. This was only the federal government. And I just assumed that's the way it was. Why did Madison write it like this, though? This is really hard. I mean, I told you what the words meant, but it's still really confusing. Why did he do it? Because he didn't want to give power to the state. So he wrote gobbledygook. He just wrote a bunch of stuff down with the idea being no one could really interpret it. Every other one's very clear and concise. This thing is not. He did that on purpose. Madison was smart. But let me show you, it was all about protecting state power. And the reason why Madison didn't want to give the states too much power, but he wanted to make it look like he was preserving state power, especially his home state of Virginia because of slave rebellion. And the whole issue is going to be then the regulated militia versus personal weapons. And the Supreme Court's going to rule time after time, especially in the 1930s when all of a sudden, when organized crime and gangsterism because of prohibition, and everyone started buying relatively cheaply made, or not, relatively cheap machine guns called Thompson submachine guns. And so the government banned them nationwide. And the Supreme Court said, of course you could do that. These weapons are crazy. People should not have machine guns. And you're the exact reason why we shouldn't have them. But
Yes.
let me show you real fast. That was the original. Just read it. That's the original that Madison wrote. If there's any question, but they took out the last bit, and I think it should be pretty obvious why. Can you read it? I can't get rid of that thing on.
So the people are saying, no, I don't want it.
What's that?
Always good.
People are saying,
So, the first part is, you see this part? It says, but no one religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service. It's written about Quakers. And by including this, it applies, okay, Quakers don't have to go, but it implies that everybody else has to join. And that sounds like the draft or conscription. And they didn't want that. So they crossed this part out to say that no, the militia will just be a volunteer force. And that's why they crossed that out. So it's a little bit more clear. They crossed it out so they say it wouldn't be the draft. And by the way, that is a slave rebellion in Haiti. Because that was the big fear of every southern state. Who was born in what year? Let's go back again. 2006, 2007. Is that when most of you were born? In 2008? Okay, the year, who was born in 2008? Okay, the year a good hunk of you were born, that's when the Supreme Court changed everything. In a court case called DC versus Heller, they overturned every single opinion about weapons, about 100. Overturned them all. What do we call this when the Supreme Court overturns previous laws? Or what do we call that? It's one of the checks the Supreme Court or the judiciary branch has over the Congress and the executive. What is that called? This is judicial review. They overturned them all and said that they're now reading it as, yes, it means militia, but also people can have personal weapons. So that's really radical, and that's in your lifetime. So when people talk about Second Amendment and having weapons, it's really new. It's really new in the United States, as in your lifetime. Meaning most of my life, it was not like now. And now it's just become a free-for-all. So that's the Second Amendment. Let's get to a few more very quickly then. So the Second Amendment is about militia and weapons, and it's really confusing, not until 2008. Now, of course, that could be overturned. Probably not. So third, just very quickly, no quartering of troops. Remember the whole thing about Boston. Fourth. Okay, so the right of people to secure the person. This is British common law. But the big thing you have to get down for the Fourth Amendment, no unreasonable searches and seizures. So that's what we have to get down for that. Second, about weapons and militia. First, Congress shall make no law. Then unreasonable searches and seizures. I'm not going to go through every part of the New Deal, or the New Deal. I'm going to get to the 1930s. Every part of the Bill of Rights. Hey, you'll be in government class pretty soon. But no unreasonable searches and seizures. Remember during the events before the Revolutionary War, the British did a writ of assistance, which was a blanket search warrant. So this was a direct reaction to what the British were doing. But you see the gray area here, just like the other two amendments. Could be anywhere. Who defines unreasonable? Congress writes the law, the executive branch carries it out. So reasonable search and seizures are perfectly constitutional. Gee, I wonder how big of a loophole reasonable will be. Meaning, they search you all the time. All the time. They look at it, especially online. It's so easy to. You have no privacy, and so they look at stuff all. They don't really look at it. They just store it, and then if something happens, they go back and look at it. And so all of you who does anything with the corporation of the United States, they have all your stuff. So when you go online, remember people are watching. And most of us, like most things online, it's boring and no one wants to watch it, but occasionally not. Let's get Amendment 5. Okay, Amendment 5, we're not going to go through every detail about this. There's a couple things. Capital crime like murder, there's a grand jury for federal cases. You can't be put twice in jeopardy, meaning you can't be tried twice for the same law. You don't have to be a witness against, it says witness against himself. So you don't have to testify against yourself. You can, but you don't have to. But let's get to the biggie. This is one you have to write down. You cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. That is huge. Every single person cannot be arrested, have things taken away from you, be searched, anything involving the state without due process of the law. So, for example, you cannot be held in prison without a trial. There must be a trial, and you must be charged. That is habeas corpus. But that is due process, and that is huge. Every single person has due process of law under the federal government. Now, it's every single person. Technically, the states must provide that too. That's a big deal. It's one of those due process of the law, but you start thinking about the fact that we cannot be technically treated differently than somebody else. It doesn't apply to just citizens, but most people just assume it does. Amendment 6, very quickly, speedy and public trial and counsel. So everyone got that? Speedy and public trial. By the way, can anyone define speedy for me?
Please, fast.
What?
Not taking excessive time.
So what? Like 1 day or what's that? Sure, or 2 years, 5 years. If you know anything about the court system, it is so backed up, a speedy trial might be 8 months. Like, wow, I made only 8 months. The crime and
Just a DUI.
huh?
It's like just like a DUI or something. It processes a lot faster.
It depends. Yeah, if you don't really need a jury.
DUI is a lot faster than murder.
And counsel, the assistance of counsel. Now, this was just basically left up in the air until 1963. But now, in every state, if you can't afford a counsel on a criminal case, it must be provided for you. but define counsel. Does it have to be good? And if you know anything about the public defenders in the state of Montana, they are overworked beyond comprehension. Or like in Texas, they don't have public defenders. It's just lawyers have to give time. And they do it, and Texas is infamous for lawyers in these cases that are are falling asleep in the court case, things like that. Meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be good. 6 or 7, let's get to 7. Common law lawsuits can be a jury trial. For big ones. We're not going to worry about the size. The point is, these are issues they saw that were lacking in British law. We don't have, are we about ready to ring here?
At like 17.
11, 12. Let me get the last little bit of the Bill of Rights. I'm going very fast over this. Hey, if you're in government next year, and I would highly recommend you take AP government, you spend a lot of time on that. Mr. Darnowski. At least he does now.
Does Kelly just teach American government?
He teaches, well, it's still government, but they call it like American Studies 2 or something now.
Yeah.
I was out of the loop on that. 8. No excessive bail or no cruel and unusual punishment. Hey, by the way, what's cruel? What's unusual?
Feathering.
Do you see how this could be open to interpretation? I mean, you could argue killing somebody is pretty darn cruel. I'm always fascinated by it. Let's find a more humane way to kill somebody. So we inject chemicals in you. How's that any better than impaling somebody on a spike?
What about unusual? Has that been defined?
What's that?
Is unusual defined?
No. So you see the gray area.
Unusual, not typical.
It's a gray area, and it also changes with time. Okay, the last 2 we have to get. Amendment 9. So the Constitution lists out a number of things, and it says it in here, but Madison knew Jefferson wanted this. So, the people have rights. Even if they're not listed in the Constitution, the people have rights. Everyone got that? The people have rights beyond the Constitution. I should add, this is the amendment about personal weapons. They refer to the Second Amendment. Everyone talks about this. This is the amendment. So DC versus Heller, no one ever talks about the second, or no one ever talks about the 9th. It's the 9th. And the 10th is another one. 10th. Powers not given to the federal government, go to the states. So powers, that's federal, go to the states. That's the Bill of Rights. 10 amendments. I remember being first told about the Bill of Rights, it was 3rd grade. And I remember my teacher, Miss Gary, funny, I still remember like so many vivid details about that. But she was telling us about the Bill of Rights, and the thing I remember most is all Bill of Rights have only 10 amendments. No, we got one more thing to add. One more thing to add. They all have only 10 amendments, which made me laugh because then I realized he proposed 12. It has nothing to do with 10, but it seemed like a very good thing. But this is the concept of federalism. This is federalism. Remember the federalism? Yeah, federal and state. But this is the part we have to get. I think I should have it here. Oh, I didn't write this down. You write this down. It only applies to the federal government. Only the federal government. It does not apply to the states. The Bill of Rights, at least at first. It did not apply is what I should have said. It did not apply. Only the federal government. It was written in such a way, and everybody assumed that this is federal. Then the states have their own responsibility. What big event would change that? The Civil War, yeah. The Civil War is going to give us our idea of rights will come out of that. And on that happy note, when do we have a quiz? Wednesday. The test will be next week. We have a quiz on 272-299. I'm looking at same kind of test, about four short IDs, 23. I got 24 multiple choice. I'm gonna go toy with it. I'll give you the review list tomorrow. Something's going on.
Yeah, I work at the hospital too, so
Oh,
it's
God,
like, I
I'm sorry. Well, you did the same thing in your school, we have the same. I'm glad you feel better. What do you do for the hospital?
I'm an internship. My dad just like, go and I diets a lot of yeah.
Look at that right now.
Oh, thank you. At least the Broncos wore their good uniforms.
I know, right? It's so pretty. Yeah, I'm going to one. There's actually like nobody in the bathroom.
Look!
I just read, my book needs to come with a better warning, because it is crap. I'm reading a murder book, it's just a free book, and it was like your children, oh, she's making her fire.
See you tomorrow.
It's like training colors, I was expecting like, oh, it's like in the library, it's being taught. I just got a very detailed description of her shooters and the nail gun. And
Oh, a nail gun? I don't
Yeah.
wanna know. I don't wanna know.
And I'm like, can you get out of my head? And it was really super part of her like sleep paralysis, and it's really similar to mine. Because I was sitting here like, I really like while I was sitting here reading it, and I was like, I feel sick now. And my
Does it have a warning anywhere?
No, it doesn't. No.
What's it called?
It's called Beyond. And it's just, and she dies like 5 times, and it's really scripted, like in the electrocuted, and like, and I was like, I wasn't ready for that. And I wrote, you're so
Wow.
I wasn't prepared, but I never did English, I was just like,
Well, your